former devout Muslim who was convinced of the truth of the gospel through historical reasoning and a spiritual search for God. He's given lectures at universities and seminaries across North America and around the world, participated in a number of public debates on this issue. He's a member of the speaking team at Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, and he's just published, literally in the last month or so, the story called Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus, a Devout Muslim Encounters Christianity. Nabeel, welcome to today's issues.
Thank you so much. It's a privilege to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and about your background, and we want to just hear a little bit about the story of how you came to Christ.
Well, I was raised in a devout Muslim home in the United States. My parents are from Pakistan, but they moved here in the 70s. I was born in the early 80s here in the States, but my parents brought with them a lot of their devout adherence to Islam and their Eastern culture. And so I was raised as a devout Muslim, reciting the Quran daily. I had read the 5 daily prayers my whole life. I even memorized the last 7 chapters of the Quran by the age of 5, which is not that abnormal, actually. Lots of Muslims memorize large sections of the Quran. And so as a devout Muslim, and as part of my faith, I was challenging Christians. I was taught to challenge them on the reliability of the Bible, on Jesus' death, his deity, to challenge them on the Trinity, because Muslims see the Trinity as blasphemy. I shook many Christians' faith as a young Muslim, and it wasn't until I got to college when I met someone who's able to start defending the faith and sharing good answers with me as to why he was a Christian. He and I went on a journey as friends, discussing these matters for years, until finally I saw that the evidence for Christianity outweighed the evidence for Islam. It was at that point that I asked God to guide me personally, and through the Bible as well as dreams and visions, the Lord led me to Christianity. And after graduating from medical school, I went into the ministry full-time, and now, as you said, I'm ministering alongside Ravi Zacharias.
I know it's hard to make a generalization, but if you could offer some thoughts on what are the roadblocks, whether they be intellectual, emotional, or familial, what are the chief roadblocks that stand in the way of Muslims even considering the claims of Christ?
Well, it's important to recognize that Islam is the one major world religion that was formed after Christianity, and therefore includes in it a reaction to Christianity. In the Quran, it says very clearly, Jesus did not die on the cross. It also says Jesus is not God, and to believe Jesus is God is a one-way ticket to hell, according to chapter 5, verse 72 of the Quran. And so from the very beginning of a Muslim's life, they're taught not only to follow Islam, but to reject Christianity. It's part and parcel of the same package. There's actually one chapter of the Quran that is highly emphasized in Islam amongst Muslims, so much so that Muhammad said it's worth 1/3 of the entire Quran, even though it's a small chapter. And the point of that chapter is basically this: God is not a father, and God is not a son. And Muslims recite this chapter repeatedly, and it just drills into their heads the impossibility of Christianity.
As you were in discussions with your friend, was there one point along the way at which you said, "Hey, maybe this really is true"? Was there a turning point? And I'm not even thinking of your conversion, but a discovery or an insight that turned the direction of your life so that you became open to the claims of Christ?
You know, that's a very good question. It was not immediate. It wasn't when I was converting either. It was in between. At first, I just saw Christianity as ridiculous. Most Muslims do, because that's how they're taught to see it. So when my friends started sharing evidence for Christianity, I began to see more and more reason why he would believe it. So I began to think, okay, I understand why you believe this. But it wasn't a turning point for me until my friend challenged me, and he said, "Nabeel, we've studied the historical nature of Christianity for 3 years, critically looking at its foundations. why don't you apply the same level of criticism to Islam as you do to Christianity? And so when he challenged me to be consistent, and I looked at Islam the same way I'd critically looked at Christianity, all of a sudden I realized, wow, not only is this Christian case strong, it's much stronger than the case for Islam. And at that point, I began to think maybe this is true.
Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus, the title of the book. Nabeel, is that right?
Yes.
Thank you. I finally got a first name right this week on our program. I'm making progress as a talk show host here. How do you pronounce your last name correctly?
It's Qureshi.
Qureshi. I wanted people to know that so that when they go and do you have a website? Where can they find this book? It's published by Zondervan.
Yeah, you can, the RZIM website has it, or you can go to seekingallahfindingjesus.com, or you can even go to nabeelqureshi.com. Any of that works.
What was the second one you gave?
seekingallahfindingjesus.com.
Okay. Now, your parents are they still Muslims?
Yes, they are.
What's been their reaction to your conversion? Are you?
It's been a long trek. After coming to accept Christ, their immediate reaction was one of betrayal. Actually, they felt that I had betrayed them.
Right.
It's something that is hard often to grasp, but Muslims don't just see their religion as their beliefs; they see it as their identity. They don't just believe Islam; they are Muslim, and so to leave Islam was a betrayal for them. And so, at first, they were very heartbroken, and they were trying to win me back to Islam. When they saw that wasn't going to work, they did cut me off for a while, but thankfully, we're in a good place again. Now.
Let me ask you this about that's good to know, and we'll pray for them. Let me ask you this, and I ask our listeners to pray for your mom and your dad. There's some differences. There's a lot of differences between Christianity and Islam. Somehow we in America always want to, view other religions in the same way we see it, Christianity perhaps expressed here in the USA. For example, Muslims don't. What's the holy day for Muslims? Sunday or Saturday or
Friday?
Friday. Okay. Yes, I should know that by now. I've been to the Holy Land enough to know that. Friday. Okay. Muslim families, do they get up on Friday mornings and everybody gets their Quran and they're off to, quote church, or they're off to the mosque and they break out and, so the kids go to their place, the parents go to Sunday school, then they get together and sing. I mean, how does it work for a typical Muslim in terms of how do they study? How do they grow? What's the object of their time spent at the mosque?
Yeah, the Muslims go to the mosque 5 times a day. So if they're in Muslim land where mosques are prevalent,
they physically go. They go.
Yeah, they physically go to the mosque.
Why don't they just stay there? I mean, what's the point in leaving if you're going 5 times a day? Anyway.
Well, that's what they do. So usually, if you're in a Muslim land now, you'll hear the adhan, the call to prayer, first thing in the morning. That's what will wake you up, and you do your ceremonial washing. You go and you pray, and then you come back and you do your morning work until Zuhr prayer, which is in the forenoon, and then you go and you pray until Asr. You go and you pray, and then you come back and do work until Asr prayer. After that, you go home. So the prayers are kind of like a calendar throughout the day. Muslims go to the mosque regularly. Each time they go to pray, they're hearing the Quran recited. And that's why so many Muslims have so much of the Quran memorized. They hear it 5 times a day.
So they're going there. What percentage of people who live in Muslim lands who would call themselves Muslims, self-identified if you were to ask them, what percentage of them actually participate to that extent, where they're actually going to the mosque 5 times a day, every day, and they are into it?
Well, in some countries like Saudi Arabia, you have religious police. And so as prayer times are happening, they'll come around with a stick and make sure if you're in the middle of the road, you're either going to the mosque or you're getting out of the road at the very least. And they're allowed to actually hit you. So That's one extreme, and a large number of people there will go to the mosque. But in places that are more free, I would say it's a smaller percentage will go every day, but it's still significant. It's nothing but anecdotal estimation on my part, but I would say maybe about 10 to 20% would actually go to the mosque 5 times a day.
We're talking with Nabeel Qureshi. That last name is spelled Qureshi, and he has written Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus, a Devout Muslim Encounters Christianity. Nabeel, I wanted to ask you about the role of dreams in your own conversion. And I mean, we hear this story often about Muslims coming to Christ, that they have a dream or a vision, something supernatural. Tell us about how, it's really a two-part question, about what part dreams played in your own conversion and why that happens so often when we hear these stories of Muslims coming to Christ.
Well, in my case, it was kind of for confirmation, and that's basically what it is for most Muslims. You see, I had studied the evidence for years, and the historical evidence was soundly in favor of Christianity, but if I were going to accept Christ just based on the evidence, that would mean giving up my family, my life as I knew it, and so I was asking God directly for his revelation. And Muslims don't believe that they can commune with God. That's communion is a Christian thing for the most part. But they do believe that they can receive revelation from God through dreams. It's the only way they really believe that God will communicate with them. And so they ask God for dreams. And so I think that's why so many Muslims who leave Islam and accept Christ receive dreams, because that's how they're expecting to hear from God. It's the only way they're expecting to hear from God. Anecdotally speaking, 50 to 70%, survey-based research has said 50 to 70% of former Muslims left because partially of dreams and visions. For me, it was exactly that. I asked God for confirmation after the evidence, and one dream after another pointed me to Christianity.
Second question, sort of follow-up to that. I know a lot of our listeners have Muslim friends, coworkers, neighbors, and they want to know what's the best way, or even where do I begin in building bridges? What advice do you have for those who want to share Christ with their friends?
Great question. I'm really glad that's the question we're asking, because so many people are asking, should we be afraid, or, what is jihad all about? And I'm really glad we asked this question instead. Because we are called to, according to the gospel, we're called to love our neighbors. And who is our neighbor? Jesus gave an image of a Samaritan, someone that Jews saw as their enemies, but he's saying they're our neighbor. Muslims are our neighbors, and we're called to love them the way we would love any other neighbor. In the United States, we have a ton of Muslim refugees coming from Somalia, from various other places. We have many immigrants who are, for example, students. Saudi Arabia is sending students to the United States. Befriend them. See what they need. Students often need a warm meal and a house to just decompress, and people to love. Just invite them to your home. These refugees often need a lot of help. They often need beds. They need advice. They need guidance. They need to learn how to drive. We as believers have an excellent opportunity, without going onto the mission field, to share the gospel in a missional sense by just meeting the needs of the Muslim neighbors around us. Of course, there are some Muslims who don't have needs like that. They're just like the rest of us.
How do you tell, Nabeel, how do you tell the good ones from the bad ones?
I would assume that they're all good.
No, they're not all good, because I
didn't say they are all good. They're not all good. But when we encounter someone, just like Christians, we have plenty of Christians who self-identify as Christians, but they're not all good either. Jesus said, "Not everyone who says
no, but we're not going around
saved."
bombing people and killing people in the name of Jesus Christ either.
That is true. You're very correct. But I would be very careful to assume that any specific Muslim is violent, because the vast majority of them are not. I would say a very, very small percentage are violent, and to impute their violence to the innocent Muslims, I think, is a tragedy.
Why are they violent, though, the ones that are? What are they motivated by?
Some of it's political. Some of it does have to do with a fervent adherence to religion. The original form of Islam, the one from Muhammad's days, the earliest layer of Islamic teaching, is actually quite violent. Thankfully, we have centuries of accreted tradition on top of that, precedents that take many modern Muslims and make them much, much more peaceful. But those sects of Islam that are trying to become reformists, who are trying to go to the original teachings of Islam, like the Wahhabi sects, like the Salafi sects, the Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, what they're trying to do is trying to adhere more strictly to Muhammad's teachings, and they end up looking more violent. But we should not impute that to the average Muslim.
Nabeel, you have a chapter in your book called "The Cost of Embracing the Cross." That's a great title. That's a New Testament thought. Help our listeners understand, for the Muslim who is thinking about the gospel, for them, what is going to be the cost of embracing the cross?
I remember as I was reading through the Bible while I was still a Muslim, this was right before I came to accept Christ, I came to Matthew chapter 10, and Jesus makes it very clear, he who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. So you have to be willing to give up your family. It says in there very clearly, unless you're willing to pick up your cross and follow me, you're not worthy of me. That's not a cliche. That's Jesus saying, be ready to follow me even to death. And many former Muslims who are Christians have to pay that ultimate price. Everything you can think of. In some cases, Muslims have to give up absolutely everything.
Well, your book is titled what again, and where to get it?
It's titled Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus. You can find that on Amazon.com, Christian book distributors. You can find that in Barnes & Nobles. It's pretty much everywhere right now.
Well, you do need to be prepared. We do need to be prepared as much as possible when you are engaged in a conversation, as you have been, Nabeel,